beginning of Christianity is what he mentioned, and why did Christianity succeed? Those are enormous questions, and I hope that you realize everything I say is controverted. And there is no such thing as the version of the truth. Not when you come to things religious, when you come to philosophy, when you come even to events. Look, we don't even know when Christ was born. That's controverted. The most recent and the most accepted date is 4 BC. If you think about it, it makes no sense. You know, he was born before Christ. So there's an enormous amount of controversy. I didn't realize this when I was young, when I was a student. I didn't realize how complex it is to translate time, measures of time from one culture to another. Enormously complex. And we don't really have, we have approximations. That's the best we can do. In many cases we do know the reign of Augustus or something like that, but we do not know a lot of things at the time. Now, having said that, don't hold me to be the oracle who knows everything about it, because there ain't no such thing. I don't care what people say, how fundamentalist they are or non-fundamentalist, whatever. There is an enormous amount of controversy every day. Now, having said that, I want to address only about really 3 major points, because that's all I have time for. The first one is, why did Christianity succeed? You might say, well, what was Christianity? But that's a whole other issue. The second point is, what did it have that other cultures did not have? Why was it successful? Why was it accepted in the Roman world? The Roman world was not Hindustan, you know. It was a very sophisticated world. And so was the Greek world. And the third question is really one of, how would I put it? What does community mean in the ancient world? Because that is a material point. Now the first, we really don't know much, as you know, about the life of Christ independently of the so-called New Testament. Our only evidence really is what was written after his death. But at the time of Paul, St. Paul, he's only 30 years after the death of Christ. Of course, there were many people who were alive who knew Christ and who really acted as a bridge between Paul and Christ. And if it hadn't been for the Pauline testimony, Paul, of course, antedates the Christian New Testament. He wrote before the 4 evangelists. And he wrote his famous letters, some of which, by the way, are no longer accepted as Pauline. But something like Hebrews, a letter to the Hebrews, a letter to the Romans, the letters to the Corinthians, and so on, are accepted as his writings. But that's a whole other controversy.
Hebrews is accepted as coming from Paul.
Yes, generally. But you know, there is an enormous amount of parsing and feeding into computers for patterns of sentences and so on and so forth. It's inferential evidence, really, for the most part. But Romans and Ephesians and Corinthians generally are accepted, and then there are others, you know, Timothy and so on. But so we do have somebody who, if not directly connected to Christ, was connected to people who knew Christ. That much we can say. Now, what difference does it make? As you remember, Paul was a Jew. He was a Pharisee. He was an educated Jew from Asia Minor, and he was exposed to Greek philosophy. He was exposed to New Latin. He was exposed to the Roman, really ethos, you might say. And, of course, he was a Jew. He had studied the way young, great Jews were studied in the synagogue with teachers and so on.
Do you think is it well documented or believed that he was taught by Gamaliel?
That's what is generally accepted.
It's generally accepted.
Yes, I think. But you know, Believe me, every one of these points is
But Gamaliel
Gamaliel lived, and Paul apparently, Paul certainly repeated some of the things, etc. So most people think yes. Most scholars think yes. But I want to mention something, why is Paul important? There's a lot of nonsense that has been written about Paul. Paul created Christianity, Paul was really the person who formed it, which is not true at all. But he did certainly a great deal, he contributed, he elucidated much, he added much. But to my way of thinking, the fundamental contribution of Paul to the success of Christianity was his insistence that you do not have to be circumcised before you go from Judaism to Christianity. That is such a material point. Most people today, we think of circumcision as something hygienic. Something, unless you're a very believing Jew, of course. But in general, when we came to America, which was a while ago, all the small children in hospitals, the boys were automatically circumcised exactly as part of the hygiene. And the mothers weren't even asked, it was just done, that's all. But the symbolism of circumcision, which is of course a whole huge question. Paul, if that hadn't happened, the so-called First Council in Jerusalem, which is also another issue, because there were no councils. It was Christ's, some people say brother, James, some people say cousin. I cannot tell you whether he's brother or cousin. All I can tell you that in Slavic languages, the two words are the same. There is no word for cousin other than brother. And my cousins were all my brothers and sisters, and I don't have any sisters, and I only have one brother.
Elizabeth, the writing was in Greek, so what would be Paul was writing in Greek, wasn't
Yes,
he?
but you see, I'm talking about not about the Greek. I'm talking about the Aramaic, because he came out of the Aramaic Jewish culture, Hebrew culture, and he, of course, was. The point that I'm trying to make is that we think of Paul as somehow always referring to the brother of Christ, because the brother of Christ presumably grew up with James, with Christ. But most scholars discount that. And the importance of Paul was not that he knew James, but the important thing was that he understood that Christianity as a movement in his lifetime was a minority thing, we would say today. And in order to take the next step, they had to do away with this close association with Judaism.
One thing I'd like to add to that is when Paul was trying to convert pagans to the religion, and then it wasn't yet Judaism or Christianity. No. It was maybe a sect of Judaism. The only way he could get the pagan adults to join the religion or that group was not to circumcise, because circumcision was done on very young children, and for adults it was extremely painful. So that's how he brought in the pagans.
But it wasn't just the pain and so on. You see, there's lots of images associated with circumcision or non-circumcision. Masculinity, etc., etc. We don't have to go through it all. I mean, to a Roman, this would have been absolutely unthinkable, and to a Greek. Why? Because they exercised in the palestra naked. Everybody could tell, could look at you and to say, what in the world happened to you, You're not one of us. And Paul was the one who really understood that. And when the apostles met for the first group meeting, we might say, the church insists on calling it the first council. But I mean, in a sense it was the first council, but only in a sense. But they met in Jerusalem, the Council of Jerusalem, in the early 70s. The first issue was, how do you become a Christian? Do you go from Judaism to Christianity via circumcision, which is of course a sign of belonging to the Jewish religion? Or do you go from Judaism to Christianity directly, without circumcision? And if Paul's group, he wasn't just Paul, it was people who supported Barnabas and so on. But if these people had not won, we wouldn't have any Christianity. There would be only a small Jewish sect, which was probably very unimportant, which sort of died a natural death.
But wasn't there the bigger issue was that the other faction not only was in favor of circumcision, but they weren't particularly in favor of broadening membership in that particular sect.
No, it really wasn't.
Beyond the Jews.
That was true, you mean the apostle, the whole evangelical thrust of Christianity, but you see, that came later.
But Paul started that.
But not in this form. I'm saying, you see, the real first issue was how restricted is membership in this group? What does it require? What does it require of you if you say, I would like to be a Christian?
But I guess what I'm asking is, that's one way of looking at it. That's the big issue. The other way of looking at it is that the big issue was how inclusive or exclusive should the group be?
But that's number two.
Oh, okay. In my mind, it's